Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you all are. Steve here. Today I thought I'd take the opportunity, I've been wanting to talk about this for some time, and that is about kings and queens. Because recently I happened to watch the Coronation of King Charles III, and I was not impressed. And you'll find out why when I read to you today. Well, we'll discuss things here about how kings are supposed to be, what kings and queens will be in the future, and what they certainly aren't right now. So the main reason I didn't like the coronation is because most people were blind to the fact that there was an initiation going on there at the coronation which was anti-Christian, anti-God, was actually denouncing Jesus and Christianity, and at the same time pretending in the hypocrisy of the church that this was a Christian coronation. No, it wasn't. It was a pagan coronation, very clearly, as many have pointed out. But I wanted to bring out how that we have this thing that kings are absolute monarchs, or they rule by divine providence or order of heaven. But is that really true? Let's see how it all started. I want to take you back in history to the scene of Israel when they had their first king. How did that come about? How did Israel, how did they start having kings? You probably know that in ancient Israel, until the time of Samuel, who was the last judge, prophet, priest of Israel, and he was there for 40 years. The people demanded of him that they wanted a king. What happened was, I'll read a little bit from the Bible here. It's a great story in itself. 1 Samuel chapter 8. And it came to pass when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, money, gold. Sound familiar? Took bribes and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways, nor make us a king to judge us. So, it says, now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all they say unto you, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. Well, Samuel goes on in the rest of the chapter to describe, look, if you get yourself a king, like the nations around you, he's going to mistreat you, he's going to take your men to be his soldiers and drive his chariots, he's going to take your women to be confectionaries and be bakers and do all the work around the palace and that. Well, that's a nice way of putting it. Actually make people into slaves and take a good 10% of people's land away from them. And Samuel tried to persuade the people, don't get yourselves a king. Not a good idea. He'll just exploit you. Nevertheless, this is verse 19, 1 Samuel 8:19. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. They said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. So that's how it all started off. And that you're talking about is about 1200 BC, something of that order, 1150, almost 1200 BC. Or actually it says here more like 1100 BC. I'm wrong, about 1100 BC. This is when Israel first wanted their own kings. For 400 years since the time of Moses, they had had judges rule over them. And the next thing that happened was that God brought onto the scene a giant of a man called Saul, a Benjamite, who was head and shoulders taller than any other man in Israel. I worked that out yesterday. Head and shoulders. I judged by myself. I'm 5'11", and if you add head and shoulders to me, that would make me about 7'2". So Saul was somebody like over 7 feet tall, a giant of a man. And God inspired Samuel to put him as the first king. And initially Saul was actually a humble guy. He was so humble that when they wanted to crown him king, he was hiding in the stuff, they say. He couldn't believe it. Why are they making me a king when I come from the humblest tribe of Benjamin and the humblest family of Benjamin? He couldn't believe it. But initially, Saul was a humble guy, and he went out and he fought the battles of the Lord and victoriously defeated their enemies and did a lot of good for Israel. Unfortunately, as often happens with these kings, in the beginning, he was always careful to listen to Samuel the prophet. Samuel's still around, alive and kicking, and being the voice of God to the king. And as long as the king listened to the voice of God, then he did great. But unfortunately, it didn't stay that way. It's very sad to see that these leaders, kings, they can often start off with good ideas, and that applies to any leaders, kings. They can start off doing good, but sadly they often end up being bad and wicked. What is the downfall of kings? I say number one, when they stop listening to the voice of God, either directly themselves or through his prophets and his high priests. And this is what tends to happen with the kings. And like I said, I was shocked watching the coronation of King Charles III. He used to be a nice guy when he was young. I remember what he stood for. Unfortunately, he's been sucked into paganism, sucked into, I don't know if he's doing it because he's forced to. I saw a scene which was nasty about 6 months ago, when I saw the head of the Rothschild family come up to King Charles, even taller than King Charles, before Charles was king, poking his finger right in Charles's chest. It looked threatening. But there's the top leader, king of the whole world, of this world, the Rothschilds, poking a finger in Charles' chest, and it was almost like, you do what we say or else. I don't know if that's what led to the coronation being the way it was, sort of anti-coronation paganism. But it says here in the Bible, in Proverbs 16:18, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And I think you would agree with me that today this planet has changed in the last 5 years, and it's openly those that rule in great pride and with a haughty spirit. And if you look at the economic forum, Klaus Schwab, God is dead, we are the new gods, we are the rulers, and you people better just do what we say or else, sort of absolute monarch attitude. Well, my Bible says they're all going to come down. Pride goeth before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. And another thing happens to kings is they can often take too many bribes. Like it's a sad story, really. The king started off with Saul in the Bible, started off humble, nice king, but then he went astray, and he ended up falling on his own sword in battle, basically. And then David became king, and David's story is a great story. The story of King David, the greatest king Israel ever had. That's a great story. And then David's son Solomon started off as a great king, and you'd say he was the richest and the wisest king that Israel ever had. And he had like 900 wives or something ridiculous. But it says when he was old, his many wives led him astray. A very sad story, because God had given him everything, and yet when he was old, he let all his wives worship the gods and idols and Astaroth and all these hosts of heaven. And so God said, because Solomon had done that, he was going to take the kingdom away from his house. But for David, his father's sake, he'd leave them the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. In fact, the prophet came along when Solomon caught on his garment, and his garment ripped, and he divided the garment into 12 parts, and he gave two to Solomon, and he gave 10, saying, look, 2 parts will now be to Judah, 10 parts to the northern tribes. And that's exactly what happened. After Solomon came his son Rehoboam to rule over Jerusalem as king, but the 10 northern tribes were ruled by Jeroboam, and also the prophets told him that would happen. In fact, it was Jeroboam who gave the pieces of his garment. That's right, 10 to you and 2 to Rehoboam. So that's what happened there. It didn't stay long. The king's ruling didn't stay very long, or so we say, in good condition in Israel. David was their best king. Solomon was good for a while, but then turned evil. The only thing we'll say about Solomon is that we're very thankful for the Proverbs. The Proverbs are fantastic. I use them all the time. In fact, I'm quoting them here today. And after Solomon came Rehoboam, and from the time of Solomon, about 1000 BC or 950 BC until Christ, there weren't many godly kings. I can count almost on one hand the number of good kings there were, but most of them, unfortunately, were too easy to be bribed and sought after gain and stuff. As it says here in Proverbs 15:17, he that is greedy of gain troubleth his own soul, or clotheth his own house, but he that hateth gifts shall live. And that's what the problem of the leaders today and the kings today is. They're just in it for the money. They're not there for the people. What king and leader on this planet is really there for the people? Very few. I think when they're young, as we talked about young kings before, they start off idealistic, got some great ideas, but then the position and the rule gets perverted, polluted by the desires of others and by the riches and the wealth of others that tend to persuade them to compromise and not do things God's way. That's the outstanding thing, to know that these kings, they start off well. I think like King Charles started off good when he was young, but they get persuaded by the pressure of others and wealth to end up following the ways of mammon, the ways of Satan, the ways of paganism. And that's what's happened. It's a very sad day for the UK. A very sad day when officially they've thrown out Christianity and thrown out God. It's very, very sad. And it's a very bad sample for all the Western nations too. So that's what eventually, and we're going back to the story of Saul, their first king, when he went astray, and he had to be rebuked by the prophet. And here with this famous verse that everybody knows so well, 1 Samuel 15:22-23, where Samuel says unto Saul, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? For rebellion is the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness as iniquity and idolatry. Unfortunately, I think that's what happened in the case of King Charles III, gone the wrong direction and dragged the UK down totally in the wrong direction. Well, here's a few verses on kings. Proverbs 16:2, is abomination for kings to commit wickedness, for his throne is established in righteousness. Very interesting, Solomon said that in Proverbs 16:2, because that's sounding more like the King of Kings, like Jesus when he comes to take over the world. Jesus' name, you look at all the Apocryphal books and the Bible, and you'll find he is known as King of Righteousness. And of course in Revelation he's known as King of Kings. Fantastic verses. So he says here, Proverbs 16:2, it is an abomination for kings to commit wickedness, for his throne is established in righteousness. Well, we are told in scriptures, here's 1 Corinthians 6, 3-5, know ye not that you should judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? Well, let's talk about the righteous, that one day our job will be to judge the angels. Judge how well did they do. I think it's God's job will be to judge the fallen angels. But we'll have a big job in the future, judging those who are supposed to do things right. Did they do it right? Amazing. Think about that. It says here, Revelation 5, 10-14. Here's our future. And has made unto us, unto our God, kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. Revelation 19, 11-16. And I saw heaven opened, and behold a white horse. And he that sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he did judge and make war. And he hath on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Look at this beautiful verse, Proverbs 16:16. How much better it is to get wisdom than gold, to get understanding rather than silver. Wow. So there's just a few Bible verses here about kings, and you could imply queens as well. Sadly, I think there's only been a few good ones through history, good kings and queens. There have been some, but it seems to me that you check things out, you'll see they're enticed by the dark side of the spirit world into being greedy of gain, as it says in Proverbs 15:17, and then they become haughty, and they become like Prince Philip was, who would boast, Charles's father. He said, oh, if I was to come back here again, I'd like to come back as a virus or something, so we can get rid of most people. Well, that's the attitude of satanic people. That's the attitude of the evolutionists. Get rid of the masses. Get rid of the people. That's Satan's idea. Satan from the beginning of time has wanted to destroy all of God's creation. Well, in order for us to rule and judge angels in the future, we've got to get rid of Satan. So I'm looking forward to the day when Satan finally gets it in the old clink and gets locked up in the bottomless pit, according to Revelation 20. And I think that's where I'm going to finish off today. Revelation 20. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand, and laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal over him. He should deceive the nations no more, thank God for that, till 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season. Yeah, what happens when he gets back out of the prison? Well, that's another story I won't go into today. Interesting story too. But anyway, it's going to be wonderful to know that evil is soon going to be totally locked up and eventually destroyed and thrown in the lake of fire. The end of evil forever. And no, it won't be lurking around, coming back or sneaking back in again. No. The days will come when there will be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, neither should be any more pain. That's how it's going to be one day. I think it'd be wonderful to be a king or queen under the King of Kings, Jesus, in the future, in the millennium, and learn to be the right kind of king or queen, one that cares about the people, make sure they're taken care of, make sure they have what they need, make sure they know how to get answers, know how to know God himself, know how to be close to Jesus. Well, we have a great future for those who love Jesus, who love the truth. We've got a very great future. But soon the King of Kings is going to sort out this awful mess. I know the planet's a hell of a mess right now, it really is in many ways, but there's lots of good people here too who are doing lots of good things and caring for people, and it's for those people we fight. We fight for those millions of people who are doing the right thing and are loving and caring and humble, and the future world will be for them. Well, I ask you to look to my books, my insights books, starting with Enoch Insights, and Ezra's Insights book too. These guys were great leaders themselves. Enoch was a king. He was actually a king of kings also. See how they lived, and Ezra the prophet, they end up calling him Lord Ezra. Why? Because he spent about 49 days fasting and praying in the presence of God and getting all the answers to get Israel delivered from their enemies. And it happened exactly as God told him. So these were true leaders in their sense because they listened to God. They got the answers. So if you want to be a virtuous king or queen, you've got to be somebody who can tune in to God all the time, listen to what he has to say, and then you won't go far wrong. But do get my books, Eden Insights, EZDRAS Insights, especially those, and also the Testament of 12 Patriarchs, all about leadership, all about kings, how kings ruled. Judah, first king of Israel. How did they behave? What was it about them that made them into a king? Why did God choose them to be kings? And by inference, queens as well. So please do get my Insights book. I believe they have a lot of information, interesting information. I believe they have a lot of wisdom in them too, and instruction, righteousness, and how to be close to the Lord, and how to learn how to rule for the future. Because God's not going to put up with his wickedness as you see of this world much longer. I think it's time for it to stop. Thanks for listening.